Benedict, and I'm a professor in the creative writing program at Southern Illinois University. And I'm here to interview Ron Rash about his new book, which is Stories and Novella. And I introduced Ron Rash, take a while, because you've got books of poetry, you've got books of stories. I'm a story writer, and you've got more books of stories than I have, and you've got novels, and you've got books of poetry. So I'm not going to try to run through all that, but can you describe the new book for us a little bit?
Well, this book is, I wanted to go back and I wrote a novel called Serena in 2008, and I've always been leery of sequels. You don't want to be the person writing Ghostbusters 2. But in the last couple of years, those characters have kind of come back. And not only the characters, but one of the themes of that book, which was how perilous what we gained as far as the national forest could be lost. And unfortunately, right now, that same fight is going on. And it has been going on for a couple of years. And so I wanted to go back just to remind people how hard won, particularly the Smoky Mountains, but all these national parks and wilderness areas, and how easily they might get lost. So I wrote this novella. I'd never written that form before, and it's a form I love. Dennis Johnson probably has one of my favorite, Train Dreams, which I think is a magnificent novella. And Jim Harrison's written something I really like too. But I wanted to try it just to see if I could do it, the challenge of it. But I thought that way it wouldn't be quite like I was saying this is a sequel. And I also had 9 short stories. So that was great to be able to get back, because that's my favorite. I think it's both our favorite form.
I love a short story.
Yeah, I think short stories can do so much. As I sometimes tell my students, I think they require all you bring to poetry and all you bring to a novel, and you have to find a way to synthesize that.
Yep. No, that's exactly what I tell my students.
Yeah, and so I wanted to go back, and Serena does come back, and a character that I always felt there was a lot more to. A logger named Ross plays a huge role in it, and interestingly, not completely coincidence, because when I was finishing this book, the COVID epidemic was starting to happen, even here. He loses his family to the 1918 flu epidemic in the book, and so I think there's a relevance there because he's having to deal with that loss and preventing Serena from actually killing a young mother and her child. So that to me was an interesting way to go about this.
Let me ask you, about things lost and that kind of thing. One of the aspects of your work that I appreciate most and that I enjoy most is the language and the kind of lost language, right? Like, kids are chaps, yeah. And it puts me in mind of Cormac McCarthy in some ways, although it's less Baroque, I guess, in your usage, yeah. It really does feel like plain everyday language that people use. How do you recover for a story or for something larger like the novella? How do you recover that language that a few people spoke that way. I grew up in West Virginia, and a few people were still speaking that way when I was a boy. But I'm getting to be an older man now, and so that's just gone now. So how do you go about recovering that and trying to make it authentic?
Yeah, well, I was very lucky in that my relatives. I spent most of my summer with my grandmother on her farm near Boone, North Carolina. And so she and I were there by ourselves most of the time. And so I really got to hear her, but also a lot of my older relatives. And what I found, and I think this is one of the most interesting aspects about folk languages or, is that they very often, there's this perception that they're not intellectual, but what I've found, two things. One is they tend to use, these dialects tend to use the natural world as metaphor and similes. And so that's universal. But the other thing is that I think I've found, particularly with Appalachian, but I sense it with Gullah and other dialects, Cajun dialects, for instance, that you know that the language is sophisticated because of the ability to create similes. That you cannot be unintelligent and create a simile because you're taking two things that normally would be perceived as so different and having the intelligence to link those. And I've given this example before, but when I was, I guess I was 16, my uncle took me into Boone. He was a tobacco farmer, and we were walking down the sidewalk, and he saw me looking at an Appalachian, young woman who I guess was a college student at Appalachian State. And he looked at me and he looked at her, and then he turned back to me and he said, that girl hasn't got enough clothes on to wad a shotgun. And I remember when I was in graduate school, we had one of those, as you do in graduate school, intellectual discussions. We were trying to nail down, well, what is poetry? And everything we kept saying, my uncle had already, he had nailed in that, that conciseness, that opening up, a vividness that we might not have seen before.
As you say that, wad a shotgun, that's the opposite of, sort of, beauty and revealing clothing and stuff like that. So but as you say, it's perfect when you think about that, that kind of evanescent little thing that just flies out when you pull the trigger on this blast. There is in your work this deep appreciation for the beauty of the natural world, right? And I can read anything of yours and feel like I've been outdoors. You know what I mean? And I can smell the sap of a tree that's been cut. But there's also, and maybe this isn't verses, and maybe, but there's also, right, this horrific. That I'm no spoiler alerts, but the end of In the Valley is really something. It's that is not sort of gentle, Ron Rash. The end of In the Valley could be out of a horror movie or like a John Wick or something, and yet it's all in this beautiful prose in this beautiful world. So how do you combine in your head that tremendous violence and not gloried in violence, right? But depicted just like you've just got a terrible photograph in front of you or something like that. How do you combine those two things that might seem at odds to somebody?
I want my work, to evoke both the wonder and also sometimes the horror. And so I think that combination very often interacts as it does in real life. And I think particularly with the natural world, in the Valley, we see some of the price that's being paid, but we do see some of the horror and the dangers of the natural world. Somebody was asking me recently about justice, whether I believed in, the law system, if there was true justice there. And I said, no, I can't quite believe as far as the way, laws and courts are set up. But then they ask, well, where is justice? Where can justice be? And I said, in the natural world. Because if you go out there and try to pet a mountain lion, something really bad is going to happen. Or if you go out into, and I think that to me, that the sense that nature is both beautiful, but ultimately uncaring about us.
The epigraph of the book is a quote from Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Yeah. And I went and looked up the sort of the larger context of the quote.
This is the Bonhoeffer quote that I wanted to use as the epigraph for this book, because it has always struck me. I don't mean the faith that flees the world, but the faith that endures in the world and loves and remains true to the world in spite of all the hardships it brings us. And there's a longer part to that, but that was the part that just really struck me, because I think has so many environmental implications, but it also just, I think, is something that we need to remember, and that kind of faith. And it seemed to fit. I actually added that late because I sensed as we all did, we're in a really troubling time. I mean, it's just overwhelming. And I thought that Bonhoeffer's quote really, struck me to the core, but it also was heartening, because I think it's a reminder that people such as he ended up being killed by the Nazis, that even in the worst times, there are going to be people who rise up. And I think in my characters in the Valley, I think I would like to believe, at least, that those characters are, for the most part, really trying to be, do the best they can. Faulkner has a great quote. He said that he believed most people were a little bit better than their circumstances ought to allow. And I love that quote. And I think for the most part, I believe that. I think, and I find, and you've done this with some of your characters too, I find it's those characters who in a moment kind of rise up and become a little bit better than we would think they might be. That to me is where stories do this magnificent thing of just kind of bursting forth, because suddenly all our presumptions are blown away, and we recognize this other human. It's kind of like, Eudora Welty says we should never condescend to our characters. And I think that's part of that too, just recognizing that humanity.
The cover of your book is that stump, right? Which is like, if I ran across that stump in the woods, I'd be tempted to worship it, or try to drink water. If it had water, I'd try, that water to have magical properties, right? And your world does, there is this, I don't know if animism is exactly the right word to use for it, but your world is so alive, right? And yet it is suffused with characters who either have religious faith or are reacting against religious faith, right? They live in a world, they don't live in a non-religious world or an a-religious world or an atheistic world, right? They live in a world that is, there are both sort of, there seem to be natural gods, right? Yeah, natural spirits, but they're also, they're also this deep traditional Judeo-Christian part of their lives.
I would agree. And it's sometimes even amusing on some levels, because I can remember during a drought time, about this time of year when I was, about 10 years old, one of my relatives up in near Boone, farmer, wanted rain really badly. So he went to church. He wasn't a big churchgoer, but he was there Sunday night, Wednesday night, and he also killed a black snake, which is obviously more like a pagan ritual, animus. And I just thought, he's kind of, hedging his bets or just getting as much, of that kind of hope and magic, whatever, as he could. But on a more serious level, I was very lucky, once again, in that a lot of my older relatives believed a lot in folklore. And that worked. I think that opened up wonder for me.
One of the great images, the combination of sort of like traditional images and then these great pagan images is, I just tried to think of what a Roman would have made of the end of the book, where the eagle, right, and the eagle is, the eagle's everybody's favorite, right?
Yeah.
The eagle, everybody loves the eagle, and but the eagle comes back, that eagle from Serena, and the eagle circles the valley 7 times, right? And that's just, an eagle circling a valley 7 times. Like, if that's not a pagan symbol of who knows what, right? But, victory or, glory or, something unglimpsed. So where do I guess you've got the eagle, but, can you talk about just writing that image a little bit, where that.
Well, I think you're right. I think we associate the eagle with so much, and also very often with power. within a culture or a very, very powerful culture. That actually brings up a really important part of what we're talking about, and also kind of ties into Bonhoeffer because it goes back to the Old Testament. When I was trying to I wanted this novella to work separately. So if no one had ever read Serena, that's okay. It's not just something tagged.
Well, it might even be an entryway into Serena.
Yeah.
I think, but go ahead.
Yeah, but so what I finally realized what I needed, and I thought, what if I think of this valley as like an arc, and then instead of being saved, the animals being saved and brought on, they actually leave. And so as you know, I have segues where the higher mammals leave first, and then we go all the way down to the fish. And
right.
So at the end, I actually have a line where I talk about it's being described, I think the last page, it's the empty ark. And I thought that would really be kind of a honing image, because I think our reasonable fear right now is that we're going to annihilate the planet. We are going to destroy it. And maybe there, I think you might see the eagle working as far as, what will come next.
You're a page turning writer, right? I mean, it's, and we tend to make a separation. And when I say we, maybe I mean writers in academia or some, group like that. Which probably shouldn't exist, but like, so the tension between that page turning impulse and the impulse to poetry and vision and sublimity, how do you work that out as you're writing, so that I read your work and I'm like, oh, Ron Rash, man, he's the best at the sentence level, but I'm almost can't take in the sentences because I'm I want to find out, like, where does this all go?
Well, you do the same. I think what I find, about that's interesting is I tell my students the most important thing is to get the reader to turn the page.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now
that's job one, right?
Yeah. I mean, you want to simplify this. That's it. But I think as many reasons as you can give for the reader to turn the page, the better. For instance, I mean, there are certain writers, for instance, Barry Hannah is a writer I read purely for language. I mean, he wouldn't know a plot if it, if he did. Yep. And that's okay. And there are other writers that I can, that I read purely almost purely for the language. And yet at the same time, I think the danger there is you get so caught up in that you forget you're also telling a story. And I think that to me is where I really want to make sure that it is moving. It's not just showing off by, writing a paragraph about a mosquito or something. That it's got to be organic. It can't feel like it's just been shoved in there. And I think that's the challenge. And it works on different levels. I mean, just those basic things of, giving the reader a break with some dialogue. I mean, things that we know, we've learned and probably teach. But yeah, I want to tell stories that are entertaining. I want the reader to feel like I'm enjoying this.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Your world has these vast implications, right? Implications from Jeremiah, from, the book of Jeremiah, which is, 3,000 years old, maybe not that much, but close to it, to our contemporary, ecological worries, our terrors, our, apocalyptic visions, that kind of thing. But then the world itself, you never write in sort of general terms, or, the world itself is very, very particular, right? Trees are very particular sorts of trees, and that's that kind of thing. And one thing is the Pierce Arrow, right? The best name for a car ever.
Yeah.
And a writer, I think, and I always wonder, when I see, like, I saw the Pierce Arrow there, and I'm like, I bet he just fell in love with that name, and at some point Ron had to put a Pierce Arrow, because Pierce Arrow, like, so great. Yeah. So things like Pierce Arrow and the particularity of the land, the region, the flora, the fauna, all of that. Where does that particularity come in, right? In tension against the sort of larger, prophetic, I think is not, you start with a discussion of Jeremiah. So clearly a book of prophecy. Where does the particularity, or how does the particularity weigh against that sort of larger vision, that larger prophetic vision?
I think this is where we get into the difference, or the terms I use for it, the difference between regionalism and local color.
Yeah, okay, good.
Yeah, I think local color tends to emphasize the difference in a sense, and I'm not saying this is always bad, but just in a sense to show, okay, this is what makes this unique, this culture. And but I think the regional writer does that same thing, except the regional writer will or the best ones will go use that almost like a farmer drilling for water. The farmer will go, keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper. And if you go deep enough, ultimately you're going to hit the universal. Eudora Welty said, I've used this quote a lot, but it's, I think, a really good one. One place comprehended makes us understand all other places better.
And then maybe this is an inevitable question, and maybe you're tired of answering it, but you've had the experience now a couple of times, and probably most famously with Serena, of seeing your work made into film, right? Turned into a visual medium, and all the compromises that entails, but also the attention it entails. So what was your experience of, you live a quiet life in a mountain town. What is it like when Hollywood comes calling, and people we all know and recognize are banging on your door and that kind of thing?
Well, they never came. That's an easy one. It was kind of interesting because Pat Conroy was a friend of mine, and he told me that. He said, you better not even try to tell them, they're not going to listen to you.
Right.
The best thing you can do is, if they give you some money, that's great. But I was never contacted about Serena. Well, the screenwriter did ask a couple of questions, and actually one of the actors, Toby Jones, who's a good character actor.
Oh boy, he's everywhere now, isn't he? Yeah.
He actually called me from London. But what was funny about it was he didn't seem to be wanting, to really ask me anything important. And I realized about 10 minutes in, he just wanted to hear this accent. So
talk to me, hillbilly.
Yeah, but it was. I think the movie Serena was so bad that people were embarrassed to ask me about it. But there was another one made of The World Made Straight, but that actually was a very good movie. It had a much smaller budget, but the guy who did it was from North Carolina. He filmed it in North Carolina.
Your life seems like a balancing act to me, right? Between, sort of popular writer who's then forced to imitate himself. And I won't name any names, but we know lots of people who began imitating themselves after their first, big popular novel and never were able to produce much good work again. And the poet who works alone and whose, work is read by weirdos like me and, relatively few other people. That kind of thing. So how do you work that balance? How do you find a way not to become a celebrity or not to disappear?
Well, I think I was very lucky in that, whatever, widespread, or larger audience came to me was really not until I was about 50.
Mm-hmm.
I published One Foot in Eden, and that was my first novel, and that garnered much more attention than because all my other books have been in small presses. But I think that was good because I was writing steadily. I wasn't expecting some big payoff. And, by the time Serena came around and, it did very well, much better than I ever thought it would. But I didn't get involved at all with the movies. I just stayed away from that. And
from both of them then?
From both of them.
So it's In the Valley stories and a novella based on Serena, kind of you get that little, kind of bite-sized drama, and then you get the, that more sprawling kind of story with Serena, because anytime you're writing about, that world, yeah, it just opens up, it opens up big. That's a big world. You think you might ever go back to that world again fictionally?
I doubt it. I've always learned never to say I'm not going to do something. I've made vows never to write a novel or never to write about something, but I don't know. I mean, right now I'm not.
Yeah.
As I say, I doubt I will, just because it would just once again seem as if, I think if I did it a third time, it really would become more.
Be going back to the well too much. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So what's next? What do so we got this book just dropped. What do we got coming out?
Well, I've actually been nothing right now. I've been working some, but on some things, but I haven't really got anything that really ready. I do want to keep writing stories. I feel like that's probably what I do best. I just, in closing, thank you for your friendship. I learned from your work. You made me a better writer. I read Town Smokes when I was starting to write, and Wrecking Crew, Wrecking Crew, right?
Wrecking Yard.
Wrecking Yard, yeah. My memory's slipping too.
No. Well, Wrecking Crew might have been a better title, but no, yeah, Wrecking Yard. No, well, that does my heart good, Ron. That if I've helped somebody like you, then I kind of makes it worth having put pen to paper.
Oh, well, thank you for doing this.
No, my pleasure.
Thank the library. Thank you all for doing this as well.